Okay, I just started recording.
All right, let's get started. Hello, happy Friday. My name is Shanae Owens. This event is sponsored by the Center for Student Diversity, but I am going to quickly pass the mic over to the student leaders who are running this event. Dean, I'm passing the mic to you. I don't need to speak at all.
Hello, my name is Jason Dean. You can just call me Dean. I'm a student worker at the center, and welcome to this Chat and Chew, the new old civil rights movement. So recently, I saw a movie in my history class. It was a history class about the South, and we watched this movie, and it's about the parallels between the civil rights movement of the 60s and the civil rights movement now, or the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's a very interesting film. I really encourage you to watch it. It's free on YouTube with ads. If you have Netflix, it's also there without ads. And just to start us off, I wanted to play the trailer for it so you can kind of get the vibe of what it is. So the movie is based off the manuscript of James Baldwin, who was a civil rights activist. And it's an unwritten manuscript. Well, it was unpublished because he died as he was in the middle of writing the book, I'm Not Your Negro. But then a director picked up the manuscript and sorry, I have dogs. A director picked up the manuscript and made it into a movie with Samuel L. Jackson voicing James Baldwin and using clips from James Baldwin as well as like direct lines from his script. So like I said, to start us off, I'm going to play the trailer. Let me make sure I'm sharing computer sound. Okay.
If any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
The story of the Negro in America is the story of America. It is not a pretty story.
Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, sure, they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. Really a kind of apathy and ignorance. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know.
In America, I was free only in battle, never free to rest.
We need to take action, any kind of action, by any means necessary.
They needed us to pick the cotton, and now they don't need us anymore. Now they don't need us, they're going to kill us all off. There are days when you wonder what your role is in this country and what your future is in it. I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. The question you've got to ask yourself, the white population of this country's got to ask itself, is why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger. I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. And you got to find out why. And the future of the country depends on that.
So yes, that was the trailer. This is a quote from James Baldwin, which I think really embodies what this presentation is supposed to, or what this Chat and Chew is supposed to accomplish. And the quote is, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it has been faced. History is not the past, it is the present. We carry our history with us. We are our history. If we pretend otherwise, we literally are criminals." Okay, so I'm going to start us off. Each student is going to ask a question based off a clip we're going to watch. That's how this is going to work. And after each clip, we're going to have a small discussion. So there's 4 clips, and I'm thinking we'll have time to go through all of them. It's only 12:08 at this point. and the clips are only like 2 minutes or so. Oh, 1 second. Okay. I forgot to have autoplay on. This is the first clip. All of them are James Baldwin and guests speaking.
All this emphasis upon black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or on religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu, I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than it already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You had to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger.
Okay. So my discussion question is focusing more on the beginning of that clip where the guest was speaking. So this is the question. How does the comments made by the man opposite James Baldwin, I do not know his name, relate to the modern white moderates and their perception of color? And anyone can lead us off for that. I can also stop sharing so we can see everyone and post the question in the chat.
I guess I'll go for it. Well, the man's comments kind of reminded me of like the common phrase I'm sure we've all heard, the "I don't see color" concept. At this point, it's like kind of old, like everybody's heard it. But his comments were kind of frustrating because it kind of creates this idea that, well, actually, I think it kind of is a common practice in American culture of someone trying to like deflect from real problems or real issues and focus on something that might cause less tension for them. So like this white man has like a sense of privilege where he can kind of just like pretend to not see what's right in front of him as a way of like not holding, you know, Americanness and whiteness in the US accountable. So he was just kind of like deflecting from the situation, which I think is like a common thing white moderates do even today.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like this blissful ignorance that if you say that it's not happening, or if like you don't experience it, then it's not happening, which, you know, a lot of criticisms against the Black Lives Matter movement is that racism doesn't exist anymore, that people are just complaining, and it's said by people who don't have to experience the consequences of this. So I think that's how it pervades our society today. Any other comments?
Yeah, Zan like really took it, like there's nothing more I can really add to what Zan said, because I feel like a lot of people that are at least educated or at least are in the spheres of like anti-racism, they understand how damaging that I don't see color perception can be. And then also like anyone who's like read like MLK and his perception of like the white moderate, and how if you like don't take a stand against injustice, you are standing with like the oppressor. But I guess what I wanted to add is I recently read, I don't know if it was an article or a book chapter by Barbara Fields, and she's written like amazing work on just like ideology in America. But she proposed that the idea of like racism and like the ideology of like white supremacy is not hereditary. It's not passed down like a gene or an old garment. It's not carried like a virus or a germ. It is reinvented every day, and we just create new ways of speaking about it or carrying it and establishing it in society. And she said that liberals and progressives, though they may be like well-intentioned, can be just as racist when they replace words like slavery, oppression, exploitation with diversity or difference. So I feel like that white moderate ideology of like I don't see color can easily come through with more like people that consider themselves more progressives, like, oh, we need diversity, when they don't really understand why we need diversity and they don't do the work with understanding the history of America. And she even goes as far to say that like affirmative action and like the Supreme Court can only define justice through enhancing the authority and the prestige of one race. So yeah, they're not like abolishing white supremacy or any sort of racial caste system in America. They're just reallocating power and prestige through legislation and what have you.
I have a question actually based off your comment. I'm interested in I'm interested in the last section of your comments about affirmative action and how it like reinforces or just redistributes power structures. Do you mind elaborating? I've never heard that. I haven't heard it until now.
Yeah, I'm really just paraphrasing this new knowledge that I got on one of my classes, but it comes from Barbara Fields, and like the chapter is called Slavery, Race, Ideology in the Slavery, Race, and Ideology in the USA. And she basically, her whole argument is that when scholars try to debate which came first, like racism or slavery, she's just kind of addressing that throughout her whole like work. But yeah, she's basically just saying that like nothing from the past would survive without this constant reinvention. And she basically is saying that like I still don't fully understand what she's really trying to say about like affirmative action. Not saying that like we don't need it, but she's saying that maybe like liberals and progressives kind of use it as a stand-in for actual like acknowledgement of America's history or actual like just improvement in like race relations in America. And she basically is just arguing that somebody that is trying to be a proponent of like affirmative action can also fail to realize the extent that racism plays in society. I definitely can go find the quotes and links and whatnot from this class.
Yeah, no, go ahead. And while you're doing that, I guess one last follow-up on this conversation before we move on. Catherine also mentioned how racism doesn't disappear, like it's reinvented, like and it may be more covert, but it's still there. And I wanted to talk about that in our society today, like what forms do you see racism taking if it's not blatantly saying the N-word? Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Sorry, I know I already talked, but I also want to like kind of plug some literature from some other classes. So for one of my classes, we had to listen to Nice White Parents, which is like a podcast that goes into a little bit of detail about basically how these affluent white families in New York City gentrified. Oh, yay. So, okay, cool. I see some people supporting the podcast, know what I'm talking about. But it basically goes into detail about how these affluent white families essentially gentrify lower income schools with predominantly Black and Latino populations. And it's just fascinating how quickly these families, like within a year, just infiltrated the schools, raised money, but reserved the money for programs that would benefit their children, but not the community of the school as a whole. And if anyone's interested, I can put a link in the chat. It's probably one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to. Like, it's just so informative. And maybe I'm saying that because I will be a teacher next year. But I definitely think it was informative about how racism manifests itself differently in terms of like school, like integration, because the parents would talk about how they love diversity. They're excited for diversity. When really what they were doing was almost colonialism, just like infiltrating these schools, taking all of the wealth that they had and reserving it for their students and completely excluding the communities of color that were already there. They were disrupting a community that was already established. And I think that's one thing that is kind of similar to this conversation about affirmative action, but like a little bit different. But this idea of like how like white moderates will often say, oh, we want diversity, we want like integration, but that's not actually what a lot of white moderates mean. They would, like in this case, it wasn't about building community and spreading resources. It turned out to be, well, this is a space we want to infiltrate and make it our own while excluding the people that are already there. I mean, the kids even were interviewed and the kids expressed that the school had gotten better since they'd been there. And they hadn't even been there a year. Like these affluent white children had been basically told by their parents, oh, the school's better now that we're here. So all these parents, PTA parents and stuff that are concerned about us infiltrating the school should be happy because the grades are better and everything's better, but grades hadn't even come out yet. So it was just like the students were already assuming that all of a sudden they, with their white savior kind of complex, had fixed everything through integration. And really it was gentrification. And they hadn't fixed anything. They made things worse.
Yeah, Zan, I just like wanted to like piggyback off of your point because it really like makes me think about how a lot of like white moderates like advocacy for diversity is like very performative. Like they want Black and other people of color to be present, but they don't really like actually listen to their voices and like their input in anything. And like I think that like speaks to why even when like populations at like schools or so or communities are already diverse by number, you can still see a lot of the institutional problems because the leadership isn't reflective of the diversity in the communities, or they're like completely gate kept out of those communities.
And yeah, I put the full quote in the chat just to see what her words were.
Okay, this has been a fantastic conversation so far. Thank you so much for everyone's participated so far. Oh yeah, someone unmuted. I don't know if they wanted to speak before we move on.
Well, one of the things I was going to say is that, and that this is a small disagreement with I think the Barber lady, is that I think it is like, I think racism and all is like a virus, because if you think of it like the common cold is a virus. We don't think about it or talk about it like the virus, but it's kind of systemic racism. We don't think about it until we get a cold or we're affected by it because something happens to us. And then here comes HIV. Oh, something big happened, or COVID-16, 19, as somebody would call it, whenever the world saw what happened to Floyd, or herpes. It's a virus, but you don't think about, like, so there's these little things. The virus evolved, they look different, they affect you, you think about them. So that's my thoughts on the whole virus thing, because I think it is like a virus. It is evolving, it's different, it looks different, but there are like the code, nobody thinks about it. But many of us be like, systemic racism is a thing and we know it's there and we want to change it and fight it, but a lot of people don't think about it like until they find themselves in some kind of situation.
I just want to add to that because it something you said, T, just made me think about just this year in general, in terms of with the virus of racism and the virus of COVID-19, it has caused us to reflect back. So instances in terms of, you think about George Floyd, you think about instances of what you're not willing to tolerate now and what you want to do differently, but it causes you to think back of a moment you had in class 2-3 years ago. It's like, man, I hate that I let that slide. And then you're affected by something that you thought was so small, or as it relates to the common cold, and you're thinking about the decisions, like, how did I quote unquote catch this cold, and what kind, I should have put a turtleneck on, or I should have, shouldn't have been out in these streets last night, or you reflect back on things that you could have done differently or you wanted to do differently, but it's like it doesn't happen until something happens that causes you to think back of, wow, this could have been prevented, or not. I take back the word prevented. It makes you think back of things that happened before that led to the point that we are now.
Okay, I hate to cut this conversation short, but I think we're going to move on to the next question. But yeah, Les Zanton in the chat, that was a fantastic analogy. I got little tingles from it. I was like, ooh, okay. But yeah, I'm going to share my screen again. This next clip is called "The Future of America."
I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist
Okay, I'm sharing sound. Okay.
Pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. So I'm forced to be an optimist. I'm forced to believe that we can survive whatever we must survive. But the Negro in this country, the future of the Negro in this country is precisely as bright or as dark as the future of the country. It is entirely up to the American people and our representatives. It is entirely up to the American people whether or not they're going to face and deal with and embrace this stranger whom they maligned so long. What white people have to do is try to find out in their own hearts why it was necessary to have a nigger in the first place. Because I'm not a nigger, I'm a man. But if you think I'm a nigger, it means you need it. The question you've got to ask yourself, the white population of this country has got to ask itself, North and South, because it's one country, and for a Negro, there is no difference in the North and the South. There's just a difference in the way they castrate you. But the fact of the castration is the American fact. If I'm not the nigger here, and you invented him, you, the white people, invented him, then you got to find out why.
Okay, And then the next discussion question.
Okay, so I'll be asking the next questions. I'll just read it out loud for everybody and then send it in the chat. How do you think the role of Black people in the United States has changed? How has it remained the same? And how much of this change has been due to systems and institutions in place?
I can start us off. When I hear this question, my first thought comes to labor and the idea of like Black bodies in labor, and it's honestly a lot of it has remained the same. And like you can think of different institutions, but the most glaring is like the prison industrial complex. And also another one that I think of is a lot of times in schools. Artist, a music artist, or a sports player, like a basketball player or a football player. Those are like the main two options that you're given, especially if you're Black and male. And I think that honestly, that's just like an evolution of Black people being labor and property and entertainment. Yeah, those are my beginning thoughts on that.
Something about the question was just like, I'm not sure if it's the role of Black people, or is society, society hasn't woken up yet, but is it somewhat of a shift where there's more opportunity that's being allowed? Because Black people have been speaking up for years, but all of a sudden the camera and the mic is there. Not that everyone is listening, but all of a sudden you see it more on mainstream TV. But these protests and these things have been happening. All of a sudden, you know, every day on your news feed, you're hearing about a new CEO that, we're celebrating it, but it's not to say that all of a sudden Black people just became capable of holding these positions, just became, just got into seats to be seen, to be considered for these positions. It's just all of a sudden, I feel like the world and corporations, whether it's guilt, whether it's let's give it a chance, or whether they're open their eyes to see the capability of the people that have been doing the work. So I'm not sure if it's anything that is shifting in terms of Black people themselves, or if it's a shift in terms of maybe slightly, the world is shifting a little bit. And I don't know if it's guilt or awakening.
So I kind of want to speak to that point. It reminds me of the concept of interest convergence, which I believe is Derek Bell, like part of like his writings on critical race theory. And it's just like this concept of when the interests of Black people in America align with the interests of white people in America, then progress can be made. Of course, this isn't like a perfect formula for how change is made, but it is like a concept of progress can be a concept that some people adopt and follow. This idea that progress can be made when all parties involved, it meets both of their interests. So I do think there is some truth to that concept. I think it is in the best interest of a lot of corporations to make t-shirts, really cringy t-shirts with like Black Lives Matter, and then sell it for like $25. Like, I do think it is in the interest of a lot of corporations to like do these things, but I don't think it's necessarily like guilt. I definitely think because of like the performative nature of some like forms of like activism, I definitely think some people feel obligated to do things, but not out of like, I don't think it's like a moral obligation. It's more of like, right now, if I don't do this, it's going to come back to bite me down the road, or I can profit from this in some way, or there's less tension with like my coworker if like I don't address this. So I definitely think there's a little bit of interest convergence in a sense here with like corporations and just a lot of, you know, people aligning with like, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble phrasing this, but just kind of aligning with like, I guess the desires and like needs of like activists and like activism and like just what's going on today. I also wanted to say really quick, sorry, I know I'm rambling, to like the question just about like the role of Black people like changing, and just, I know Dean talked a little bit about Black bodies in labor. It makes me think about how human value is often determined by like economic reasons. It's like, can you make money? How can you help the economy? And it's kind of like interesting to me that like quote unquote good Black people might be people that make more money or are more educated. I'm using quotes here because none of this stuff matters, y'all. But it's just kind of like this idea of like economic value is almost seen as like human value. And I think that existed during slavery. I mean, enslavement of Black people literally created the economy we have. So it, you know, fostered capitalism. So it's just the idea of like economic value and being attributed to like human value, I think is something that we've seen over and over again, even today, when we're talking about like the value of like Black people in the US. It's always like economic, which is super problematic.
Yeah, I agree with Zan and her point about a lot of times human bodies are like compared with like economic value. And wait, I lost my train of thought. Okay, come back to me real quick. I lost my train of thought.
even to Zan's point, when it comes to economic bodies, and I'm not taking away from anyone's credentials, but if there's a company that is struggling or has put out problematic statements or have been in the news for the wrong reason, and then all of a sudden they bring in Zan as their chief diversity officer or as their CEO, it could bring off that like, oh, we're better now because we hired not only check back woman, check back Black woman. For some people, they feel like we've done enough. We haven't, you know, hopefully Zan's going to change the structure, but on these, you know, these billboards, we're putting Zan everywhere to make sure that the public knows that we're down for the cause, even if Zan's not down for the cause. But that also falls into the economics in the body, the Black bodies.
Excuse me, who is Zan?
Alexandra Harris.
I mean, y'all keep saying Zan. I was like, who is that? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Oh. Okay, so what I was gonna say was that like to Zan's point, like how certain jobs and stuff are looked at badly, and that phrase that some people say, like the quote unquote lazy Black person, and the reason they're not advancing in life is because they're lazy, or they don't do this and they don't do that, or like they're not trying to quote unquote better themselves economically. I just think that goes to Zan's point of like equivalating someone's value to like their economic status or like what they can produce.
Any additional comments before we move on to the next clip? All right. Okay.
Most of the white Americans I've ever encountered, really, had a Negro friend or a Negro maid or somebody in high school, but they never, or rarely, but after school was over or whatever, came to my kitchen. We were segregated from the schoolhouse door. Therefore, he doesn't know. He really does not know what it was like for me to leave my house, leave the school and go back to Harlem. He doesn't know how Negroes live. And it comes as a great surprise to the Kennedy brothers and to everybody else in the country. I'm certain, again, that like most white Americans I have, encountered, they have I'm sure they have nothing whatever against Negroes. That's really not the question. The question is really a kind of apathy and ignorance, which is a price to be paid for segregation. That's what segregation means. You don't know what's happening on the other side of the wall because you don't want to know.
I was, in some way, in those years, without entirely realizing it, the great Black hope of the great white father. I was not a racist, or so I thought.
Okay, so I'll ask the next question and then I'll put it in the chat. So the question is, how does segregation still pervade our society today, physically and mentally? And how important do you think it is for white members of society to see Black living in order to empathize? To combat racism? Do you think it should be necessary? I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm doing that, thing at the end of each question, but I guess it's a weird habit.
Yeah, I actually just had a conversation with my friends about this the other night because we just are the type of friend group to really talk about race. I mean, I don't know, y'all know like Cameron and Jasmine. Yeah, they're two Black women. And we were having dinner and we were just talking about just William and Mary and like how it is like PWI. And we got to the discussion, I think, yeah, someone brought it up of like, yeah, like you see how blatant it is for like white women or white men to kind of do the bare minimum to like prove they're not racist. And like that's all they feel like they have to do. And like this, the Baldwin quote, and then like these questions are asking, why don't you have like Black friends? Why don't you interact with Black people? Why don't you listen to them? Why? And that really comes down to the line between sympathy versus empathy. And it makes me think of a quote, I think it comes from Black Skins, White Masks, where he's talking about white people will go to Black people when they feel they've become too mechanized in the world and they need a little human sustenance. And what he means by that is that white people will go to Black people for their music, their artwork, their speeches, their stories of pain, and then get that feeling of, oh, I sympathize with you, I understand, but that's as far as they'll go, to understand Black people and to like actually have conversations about them and their lives. And so me and my friends were just talking about like for me, like in high school, like all my friends were Black women. I did not like have any like white friends. And that just, not to like be like, oh, look at me, I'm so great, but no, not at all. But it just goes to show like I'm a history major, And I will be in many, many history classes where it's like 30 people and maybe, if not no Black people, one or two. But I remember like last semester in my historian's craft where you like have to present and share with the class multiple times on your big fat research paper due at the end of the semester. And like out of 30 people on a history class about America, just pre-Civil War America, I was the only person to write about Black people. And like that kind of just for me, it speaks volumes to like, white Americans just kind of they aren't taught that they lose any value of life when they're not friends with Black people. And then me and my friends also discussed how Black people have to learn how white people speak, learn what they eat, learn their culture, learn all these things to gain any social upward mobility in America. But white people can go to their graves without knowing a thing about Black people besides their suffering.
Yeah, that brings me to the idea and thought of like code switching. And I just, I recently saw a TV show and it discussed code switching, and there were two combating opinions on code switching. One was, why should you have to code switch? Like, it's really not fair, especially considering when white Americans don't have to code switch. I guess especially like northern white Americans don't have to code switch to get by in life, but anyone who kind of differs from that mold has to code switch to get by. And the other opposing opinion was that code switching is helpful. Like, you shouldn't degrade those who code switch because it's a way to survive. Because like code switching is necessary at times, like Catherine said, for upward mobility, code switching can be necessary. So I kind of wanted to like, I guess, ask a follow-up question. What is like opinions on code switching? Like, do you think it's necessary? Are there other ways to move upwardly? Like, should we be, instead of asking people to code switch, should we be asking others to know or to like recognize other ways of being, etc.?
I hate it, but I do it all the time. I'm becoming more frustrated with it. And I don't know if that is being home isolated through COVID, that I grew more frustrated in terms of having to put on or play nice. I don't play nice, but I mean, I'm not nice, but I play nice. I don't even know how to describe that. Even my play nice isn't nice, but it's nicer than it could be. But I'm more frustrated these days than it was. It's not as easy for me since being home than when I was at work and just kind of, biting my tongue in certain situations. But it also could have a lot to do with the compound of the racial injustice that 2020 brought. Like, it wasn't anything new, but the fact that it was just like back to back in your home, you're just watching it. Like, it felt like 2015 all over again, when we were dealing with the back-to-back police shootings. So I think for me, I'm just, it's the point of just like, I'm tired of making other people comfortable and I'm uncomfortable. But I can't say that I don't do it.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, I think me and Zan were kind of talking about this the other day. We saw a video on social media of this non-Black lady. She was using AAVE and like she slipped up and said the N-word, and then like she code switched so quickly to like save herself and was like, oh, I'm so sorry, da 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 da. And I was just gonna say that I think it's interesting how like a lot of Black people like have to code switch as a means of survival, but non-Black people of color like do it for sport or like because they think it's cute, they think it's hip. And you can see this with like a lot of features of Black culture. And I just think that, I don't know, I think this issue needs to be addressed because, especially on social media, you can see it very, like, it's very apparent, but no one wants to address it. No one wants to talk about it. People just want to use Black culture when it benefits them. As soon as the tables turn, what is Black culture? So I just think this issue is really interesting.
So I want to speak to, now I can I call you Zan even though I don't even know you? Okay, so Zan, the second part of the question was how important is it for us to think of, to change for whites so they can empathize with us, in short. So I think that I don't think we understand how we are constantly being manipulated, indoctrinated, and conditioned. Like that's whether you unless you're intentionally trying not to. Like I've been watching the show called Hacking Your Mind. Like our mind is being hacked all the time, whether it's TV, social media, the books we read. That's somebody's perspective. Like so, if you're not in like constantly trying or intentionally paying attention, you're being indoctrinated. And so whites quite often have been indoctrinated to think a way about Black people, minstrel shows, most like church. How many times have you seen a good TV show around Black church? It's quite often somebody stealing, killing, sleeping with everybody. Like it's always, I've rarely, I don't think I've ever seen a show that's been good around a Black church. But that speaks to, oh, well, if a white person or even a Black person that doesn't, go to church, see, that's what I'm saying. That I knew it was like that. And so, yes, I think that a part of, if people saw more things that make them empathize with us, it might help them subconsciously. Not like, I just recently started seeing more Black people on the St. Jude's uh, commercials. Like I have never seen so many Black people in my life. I don't know if somebody brought it to their attention, but you usually would see white kids when they recruit you for money. But I see, and I'm happy to see it. But it makes you say, "Oh, Black people get sick too," and "Oh, Black people need this as well." And so, speaking to code switching, I think it's the same with that. Like we are taught, you, and this might be subconsciously, but you speak a certain way around your parents, you speak a certain way around your friends, you speak a certain, like, so that's just like a thing that we do. And it might be uncomfortable when we know like we're doing it because we don't want to be looked at in a specific way because the color of our skin. But that's another thing that we're conditioned to do. Like most people don't just talk any kind of way around their grandma, and they might talk different around it. So I think we just kind of taught and manipulated and indoctrinated in some of this.
But even to that, I just think about what Zan put in the chat in terms of, you can call me Zan because this is community. We are, it's about a sense of comfort. And the fact that this space right here, even though we just, for some people, just met 52 minutes ago, this is a space of comfort based on the topic that we're talking about. So I often, my friends joke, like, there's an SVO and then there's an A, like, then depending on the formalities of how I am. And I often say, I'm like, my coworkers, depending on who they are, they get the formal SVO. I said, but my students, they get nay. Like if we have a relationship, like they get the real, not that SVO isn't real, but I'm more informal. I can have conversations with students that I have a relationship with because there's a comfort level there. So just like in terms of like, you can call me Zan because this is our community. There's a community with people that you feel comfortable with. And that space was created just in these moments.
Okay, so the time is 53. We could either end early or watch the next clip and just converse until time. Does anyone have any strong opinions towards either? So I think the next clip is like a couple minutes too. So we'll have like 5 minutes of conversation.
I say we watch the next clip.
All right.
If we were white, if we were Irish, if we were Jewish, if we were Poles, if we had, in fact, in your mind, a frame of reference, our heroes would be your heroes too. Nat Turner would be a hero for you instead of a threat. Malcolm X might still be alive. And everyone is very proud of brave little Israel, a state against which I have nothing. I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm not an anti-Semite. But when the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him.
Hello, so my name is Makita, and I'm gonna be reading the last few discussion questions, and then I'll drop them in the chat as well. So the first one is, how have Black bodies been portrayed in American society throughout the years? How has this brought harm? And the second question, comment on Baldwin's comparisons between white and Black and brown people when claiming, give me liberty or give me death. What does he mean by this comparison?
The first thing that came to mind just listening, I just thought about the signs from the civil rights movement that said, I am a man. And then the signs now in terms of Black Lives Matter. And the fact that these even have to be put on signs to remind people that this is who I am and that I do exist and that I'm important. And without saying no, but showing, no, this is not true. No, you are not considered a man. No, your life does not matter. Speaks volumes. So it's not the same.
I'm actually rereading The Fire Next Time for one of my classes, and my copy is like very well annotated. Like, this is literally my second Bible. Baldwin is like my favorite author, but he definitely drives his point, the comparison between like the give me liberty, give me death, at the end of his the short book of like saying that Black Americans have had the great advantage of never having believed the collection of myths to which white Americans cling, that their ancestors were all freedom-loving heroes, that they were born in the greatest country in the world has ever seen, or that Americans are invincible in battle and wise in peace, that Americans have always dealt honorably with Mexicans and Indians and all other neighbors or inferiors, that American men are the world's most direct and virile, that American women are pure. And he kind of continues with saying that it would be possible to kind of dismiss white people as slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing. And throughout this whole book, he just kind of tells, and in the letter he writes to his nephew at the beginning of like, there is no reason for you to like want to become like white people, because they need to stop believing that they possess some intrinsic value that makes them superior, and that any sort of person of color, like their life goal is to be like white people. And that kind of comes with the new type of racism you kind of see in today with like upward mobility of like, oh, if you get like white people, you get in their spheres, their jobs, their standards, then the proximity to whiteness equals like success. So definitely like this whole book just kind of, it's kind of just a warning to white America, like wake up, like stop believing these lies, these myths, and stop perpetuating them, and stop thinking like all people of color of the world already know this, and they're getting very, very frustrated that they have to keep coddling you, teaching you, just waiting for you to kind of get with the program.
I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of that point. The second question about like the give me liberty or give me death, like comparison between white Americans and Black Americans saying it, it really highlights that there's like a double standard when it comes to justice. And maybe I'm thinking about this right now because I'm currently working on my independent study that talks about lynching and school punishment and how they interact very similarly. But anyway, I'm not gonna fall down that rabbit hole. But this book, which actually I think is really good, it's called American Lynching by Ashraf Rushdie, kind of goes into detail about how lynching over time kind of like molded and changed and manifested itself. And one of the key components of what a lynching is this idea of like justice. And okay, bye. But there's kind of like this idea of when the law doesn't work in favor of white people, white citizens would have to take it into their own hands with this idea of like mob justice and frontier justice, and that there's like collective agreement amongst these white communities that, you know, we can lynch someone because we can't wait for the law and we have to take the law into our own hands. And there's this idea of democracy in the language in which historically white people would use when describing why they need to seek justice. Like, this is democracy. We're all working together. We all, as a community, decided we needed to do this extremely horrendous act of violence because the law failed us. And this idea of like, it's kind of like the same lingo as like, give me liberty or give me death. Just like there's this like double standard for, you know, white citizens historically in the US have been able to put their foot down and say, hey, if I don't get what I want, there's gonna be, you know, hell to pay. But when a Black American says the same thing, after years, hundreds of years of just being oppressed, suddenly it's like there's uproar. When there's always been this idea of, you know, taking justice into one's hands in American culture, it's just oftentimes used to oppress, you know, people of color in this country. So I don't know, I kind of think about it as like this double standard between what is true justice, you know. I feel like the phrase is the same concept.
Yeah, and just to add one quick note, since we're short on time, for the second question, I just thought of this past year when Black Lives Matter was peacefully protesting, and the reaction from the police and everybody saying they're rioters, this, that. And then recently, when the terrorists stormed the Capitol, it was a much different reaction. So I feel like Baldwin's words are prevalent today. I don't know how long they will be prevalent, but history seems like it's continuously repeating itself.
Really quickly to the first point, like Jason said, as far as black bodies being portrayed, and it may not be so much of a portrayal, but you see all the black athletes and the millionaires, and how it harms us is that quite often in our community, like, oh, you got to be an athlete. Nobody tells, well, not nobody, but quite, you don't hear a lot. Oh, you need to be a lawyer, like, uh, or you need to be a judge, or you need to want to be a doctor, or they want you to play football or basketball. That's the only way to get to college. Although there are academic scholarships, most often you don't hear that. Then we talk about birth of a nation. Oh, black men gonna rape white women. Like, that's the only thing. So that's kind of the portrayal quite often, and that's still in some people's psyche. Like, black men are dangerous because white women. I don't know if they necessarily know this or not, and y'all can answer this if what give me your thoughts. If they know they like the most uh, protected species in America, at least. Like they are almost a protected class.
Yeah, no. It's interesting. One of my friends was taking criminology class, and she mentioned that like American serial killers are famous. Like you don't really hear that many serial killers from other countries, not as much as American serial killers. But when you look at the pattern of American serial killers, they've all been mostly white men, and it's interesting to consider that one of the reasons that could be is because their targets are white women. And white women are like the protected class of the United States. So when white women are targeted and killed, then an uproar is created, and that's why these serial killers are caught, or they get more attention than serial killers who may go after those who are perceived as like less worthy. Because I'm sure there are other races of serial killers, but serial killers tend to go after other victims tend to be of the same race. So yeah, to speak to like a protected class of people. If there are no other lingering comments, I think we're gonna end because we're at 1:05. Does anyone have any like last like hot seat comments? Well then, thank you so much for coming. This has been a fantastic conversation. Like, yes, thank you. Shanae, would you like to take us out?
I just want to say thank you to, CSC staff. You all did a great job putting this together. This was all them. I take no credit. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and I appreciate you all. Enjoy your weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Okay, then when I end this, the recording should automatically save to my desktop. And then should I give it to you, or would you like me to?
It's actually going to go to the cloud off